Now there's a surprise. The Telegraph newspaper's excellent science editor, Sarah Napton, this weekend reports that the impact from COVID lockdowns is now killing more people than the virus. She writes that experts believe higher deaths from heart complaints and diabetes, as well as economic damage, mean the indirect effects of the pandemic will be greater than COVID itself. Many of us flagged this up at the time after identifying about 3 or 4 weeks into the course of the pandemic that this virus could not and would not be stopped. Where is the cost-benefit analysis, we cried? What will the impact be on people's lives and livelihoods as a result of the economic damage and restricted movements? And we also asked, why are we paying healthy people to stay at home for a potentially nasty virus, but mostly mild, from which over 99% of people will fully recover? Don't forget, we were told at the time, a third of people will have no symptoms. Some pandemic. Remember the government ad campaign, Act Like You've Got It? We inflicted all of this damage and loss of life for a virus over a third of all humans had to pretend they'd got. Act like you've got it. Dance like no one's watching. Sing like no one's listening. If only we hadn't listened to the terrible advice of SAGE or taken any notice of the junk modelling of Imperial College. Well, the chickens are coming home to roost. The National Health Service, which became the National COVID Service, was effectively mothballed throughout, ignoring far more serious illnesses like cancer, heart disease and diabetes. Take a look at this tweet from a viewer of the programme, which is typical of so many. Austin tweeted, "My friend has bladder cancer. They literally stopped his treatment during COVID." Let that sink in. They stopped treating his cancer because of COVID. What the F was the rationale? Meanwhile, in the same article, the Telegraph's Sarah Napton quotes top medic Amitava Banerjee, Professor of Clinical Data Science and Honorary Consultant Cardiologist at University College London, who fears the indirect effects of the pandemic will turn out to be greater than the harm from COVID itself, and thinks it's vital for future preparedness to actually look at the bigger picture when it comes to health policy. He says we should never, ever have had a pandemic preparedness team that did not consider the indirect and long-term effects. How right he is. If only he'd been in charge. Many got in there early with this obvious analysis, like the University of Bristol 2 years ago, who predicted 500,000 deaths from the economic cost of shutting the country down. Sadly, there's no end in sight to this madness. The EU are getting tooled up for more COVID tyranny with the announcement of a legally binding treaty for future lockdowns and mask and vaccine mandates in the bloc. Thank God we're out. Nothing can repair the damage of this disastrous, failed experiment, one which so many of us said wouldn't work and which has come at such a high societal, health and economic price. And that's before we get to the incalculable damage to kids, who, by the way, will pick up the financial bill for this bullshit in the years ahead. Well done, everyone. But we can begin to heal and move on if this historic mistake is never repeated. The cheerleaders for lockdowns, echo chamber scientists, woke medics and fear-mongering celebrities have blood on their hands. The death toll and the trail of human damage from these policies will be with us for years, if not decades to come. Those of us that called it out at the time were the bad people, apparently. Except it's been the biggest I told you so in history. Never forgive and never forget. And when it comes to any future disastrous COVID measures, 2 words must resonate. Never again.